Perhaps the most iconic figure of the 1920s, the flapper, became the symbol of a youth movement that upheld new ideas about womanhood and appropriate female behavior. The flapper attitude was characterized by blunt truthfulness, fast living, and sexual behavior. They attempted to change the social status of women by embracing modernism and transforming the concept of the ideal woman. In previous decades, the Gibson girl, with her long, luscious hair, her hourglass figure, and elegant tailored gowns, had been the model of femininity. Flappers, on the other hand, cut off their long hair, favoring instead the short bob or shingle cut. They rejected the waist-constricting corset and the hourglass figure it created. Their loose-fitting dresses with drop waists and knee-length skirts created a more boyish silhouette, which some women enhanced by binding their breasts. Young women began to engage in activities previously limited to men, such as smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol, even though prohibition had made drinking illegal. They listened to jazz music and did new, energetic dances like the Charleston and the Black Bottom, despite objections that these dances were wild and obscene. Flappers believed that both women and men had sexual desires that were natural, not shameful, and that there was nothing wrong with expressing those desires. Therefore, they had no qualms about dancing close, necking in the back seats of cars, attending petting parties, or even having premarital sex. At the end of the 1920s, due to the stock market crash, frivolity and recklessness was forced to come to an end. However, much of the flappers' changes remained. They created what many consider the new or modern woman. In the 1920s, women made up 22% of the American labor force, and that number grew throughout the decade. Among married white women of both native and immigrant backgrounds, only around 10% worked outside of the home. Among single women, there was a huge increase in employment during this era. Certain occupations had always been weighted towards women: teachers, social workers, nurses, and librarians. And for those who were working class, textile mills had been one of the type of factories where jobs could be found. But with the rise of the corporate office, a number of other types of jobs opened up. Typists, filing clerks, stenographers, and even some secretarial roles all became possibilities for the ambitious young woman. A lot of women, though, stayed in their factory jobs. Not every woman could get a new job. Some women stayed housewives and did cooking and cleaning. Although women were not working in profoundly new jobs, the number of working women had increased. The passing of the 19th Amendment was huge for women, but it took them more than 72 years to finally win the vote. The suffrage movement and protesting did not begin in the time of this famous photo. For years, women had been fighting for their right to vote, to have a voice. In the 20th century, leadership of the suffrage movement passed to two organizations. The first, the National American Women's Suffrage Association. NAWSA lobbied President Wilson and Congress to pass a women's suffrage constitutional amendment. In 1910, NAWSA's membership numbered in the millions. The second group, the National Women's Party, under the leadership of Alice Paul, was a more militant organization. The NWP undertook radical actions, including picketing the White House, in order to convince Wilson and Congress to pass a women's suffrage amendment. The NWP targeted Congress and the White House through a revolutionary strategy of sustained, dramatic, nonviolent protests. During protests, women were sometimes physically attacked and their banners were torn from their hands. Some were arrested at the White House, went on hunger strikes, and faced brutal prison conditions. All of this drew attention and created enormous public support for suffrage. In 1920, due to the combined efforts of the NAWSA and the NWP, the 19th Amendment was finally ratified. In the 1920s, women became more prominent in the workforce, gained the right to vote, changed their style, and became more independent from men.